The baby kicked twice. Just a light flutter, the kind that makes you catch your breath mid-sentence and press your fingers to your belly without even thinking about it. I did that now, standing in the VIP waiting room on the third floor of one of Manhattan's most exclusive maternity centers, clutching my referral slip for what was supposed to be a routine 5-month checkup. The air conditioning was cranked too high, the way it always was in rooms like this, rooms designed for women married to men who paid enough that comfort became an afterthought. I wrapped my free hand around my rounded stomach and shivered. Ryan's assistant had called me just the day before to swear, again, that Ryan would absolutely be there. That he had blocked the time. That nothing would interfere. I had nodded on the phone like I believed it, because after 5 months of identical promises broken one after another, nodding was easier than grieving. The receptionist smiled and told me 2 patients were ahead of me, that I could relax in one of the chairs by the floor-to-ceiling window. I sank into the armchair and set my bag beside my feet and looked out at the city below, at the rivers of yellow taxis and the tourists with their cameras tilted upward and the pigeons working the ledges with that particular, undignified persistence. I thought about nothing specific. I was good at that by now, the careful skill of keeping my mind blank and smooth, like a lake before the wind hits. That was when the noise started. A murmur first. Then a voice, sharp with excitement. Then another. I heard his name before I even lifted my head. Ryan Blackwood. Oh my God, that's Ryan Blackwood. Is he getting married? Who is she? I looked up slowly. The screen that usually looped pregnancy wellness content and clinic advertisements had switched to a live entertainment broadcast. The camera was aimed at a dazzlingly white chapel sitting on a private estate above the Pacific in Malibu. A red carpet stretched from a long curved driveway all the way to the chapel doors. Ushers in matching cream uniforms stood on either side. A drone swept over the ocean and caught dozens of luxury yachts anchored in the water below, paparazzi cameras visible on their decks like weapons pointed at the shore. And then he walked into frame. Ryan Blackwood. Custom black tuxedo, posture perfectly straight, jaw set like stone. He stood beneath the chapel archway and lifted his wrist to check his watch, that specific gesture, the quick glance down, the almost imperceptible tightening of the lips, and the room around me seemed to tilt. I knew that gesture. I had watched that gesture across 1,000 dinners and 100 boardrooms and in the dark of our bedroom when I was already asleep and he thought I couldn't see. Impatience, barely leashed. Did you hear? The bride is Serena Vale. The actress. She just won that award, the one everyone was talking about. A young woman next to me was typing rapidly on her phone, her eyes fixed on the screen. I heard this wedding cost 8 figures. Her veil alone is 60 feet long. The camera moved inside. The pews were packed with faces I recognized from magazine covers. And then, in the front row, sitting with the particular stillness of someone who rehearsed how to look serene, Margaret Blackwood. Ryan's mother. Wearing dark plum, not a single hair out of place, holding a smile that I had seen 100 times up close and had long since stopped mistaking for warmth. The bride entered on her father's arm. The dress was extraordinary. Cascading lace, what looked like diamond dust catching the California light. Her veil hid most of her face but not the precise, practiced curve of her smile as she moved toward the altar. A sharp cramp seized my abdomen. Not the baby. Something lower, something clenched and physical and arriving from the place where the body stores everything the mind refuses to process. I doubled forward and gripped the arm of the chair, and a nurse appeared at my side almost immediately asking if I was all right, and I said yes, just the air conditioning, just a little dizzy, and I did not take my eyes off the screen. The priest's voice came through the television speakers, slightly hollowed by distance. Ryan, do you take Serena to be your lawfully wedded wife? The waiting room went completely silent. Every woman in that space stopped moving. The camera pushed in on Ryan's face. A muscle moved in his jaw. And then his voice came through, steady and clear, stripped of everything. I do. The referral slip in my hand had gone damp. Its edges had curled. I looked down at my fingers and noticed they were shaking, though I had not given them permission. Behind me, on the screen, confetti fell. Someone in the waiting room started clapping. And deep inside me, in the dark warm space where two tiny lives were growing without any knowledge of the world outside, the baby kicked again. Before I tell you what happened next, and I promise you, what happens next will change how you see everything that came before, I want to ask you one thing. If this story is already hitting you somewhere real, if you've ever felt invisible inside a life that was supposed to be yours, hit that subscribe button right now. Because this is one of those stories that doesn't end where you think it ends. Stay with me. The ultrasound room was cool and quiet. Dr. Chen spread the gel across my belly with practiced efficiency and pressed the probe to my skin, and the monitor flickered twice before the image steadied. Two tiny figures floated in the dark. Curled like parentheses, like a matched pair of question marks. Heartbeats visible as rapid white pulses. Twins are developing beautifully, Dr. Chen said, her voice professionally warm. Look, there's the boy, there's the girl. The little one is kicking his sister. I stared at the screen. Two children. Ryan Blackwood's children, and mine. Legally, he was still my husband. Our marriage certificate was locked in a safe deposit box I hadn't opened in almost a year. Margaret had brought up divorce 6 months ago and I had signed every page she put in front of me, and Ryan had accepted those pages and promised to countersign and never did. He said there was no rush. He said it would be cleaner after the pregnancy. He said a great many things with a great deal of calm, and I had believed enough of them to stay. I wiped the gel from my skin and asked Dr. Chen, very quietly, whether extreme emotional stress during pregnancy could harm the babies. She looked at me over her glasses for a long moment before she answered. Briefly, she said, the body regulates. But prolonged, she paused. Lily, did something happen? I told her no. Nothing. Just asking. I walked out of the clinic and into the 3:30 sun and my phone began to vibrate in my bag. Ryan. I let it ring. He sent a text. Dinner at his mother's tonight, 7 o'clock, Marcus picking me up at 5, attendance non-negotiable. I stood on the sidewalk and looked up. On the massive LED billboard across Times Square, they were already replaying the wedding. The camera was on Ryan and Serena cutting the cake, his hand over hers on the knife, her face turned up toward his, radiant, triumphant. I started laughing. I stood on the street in the middle of the city and laughed until my eyes burned, and then I raised my hand for a cab. The driver barely made it 2 blocks before my phone rang again. Unknown number. A journalist from some entertainment outlet, voice clipped and fast, saying they had information that I was Ryan Blackwood's legal wife, that his marriage today could constitute bigamy, that they had documentation. I said he had the wrong number. He said he had proof of our registered marriage, proof of my current pregnancy. I said he had the wrong number. I hung up and turned the phone off and in the next moment realized what was coming, the flood, the cameras, the Blackwood's legal team already calculating how to make this disappear. I told the cab driver to take me to Jade's building in the West Village. Jade opened the door in a silk robe with her hair wrecked, and one look at my face brought her straight to the floor next to me. I slid down the back of the closed door and sat on the tiles and told her what had happened in 3 sentences, and watched the confusion on her face shift to shock and then to a fury so white and clean it looked like grief. He is insane, she said. You aren't even divorced yet. That is bigamy. I will bury him. I told her it was useless. The Blackwoods could make black look white. I told her what I needed instead. Her airline connections. A ticket out of the country tonight, booked under a name that wasn't mine. Anywhere. Just away. She looked at me for a long time, then opened her laptop. Singapore. Direct flight, 9:45 p.m. 2 seats left in business class. She would book it under her cousin Kate's name. I would pick up the ticket at the VIP counter and give them Kate's information. When I landed, I could stay with her Aunt Helen, a woman who ran a traditional Eastern medicine clinic and wouldn't ask difficult questions. But before she could finish explaining, headlights swept across the window. Marcus, the Blackwood family driver, parked outside the building, 4:30, 90 minutes early. Because Margaret Blackwood had never in her life been willing to wait. Here is what you need to understand about what happened next, because everything else in this story depends on it. I did not run because I was weak. I ran because I was 5 months pregnant, alone, and I had just watched the machine that had been grinding me down for 3 years publicly announce that it was finished with me. Running was not weakness. Running was survival. And sometimes, surviving long enough is the most devastating thing you can do to the people who wanted to see you fall. I told Marcus I was nauseous. I asked him to pull over. The moment he got out of the car to help me, I bolted into the entrance of a nearby parking garage, stripped off my coat mid-stride, pulled a dark hoodie from my tote bag and dragged it over my head, and ran for the far exit. Jade's small white hatchback was idling in the side alley, exactly where she said it would be. I threw myself into the passenger seat and she hit the gas before my door was fully closed. I rolled down my window on the highway and dropped my phone into the back of a passing garbage truck. Jade's eyes went wide. I told her anything that could track me had to go. I pulled the prepaid phone she had bought for me out of my bag and turned it on. She handed me a folder, passport, visa, booking confirmation, all under the name Kate Thompson. She told me her Aunt Helen would be at the airport in Singapore. She told me Aunt Helen knew nothing except that a friend was coming for a quiet place to carry out a pregnancy. I opened the passport. The photo was similar enough. The eyes were different though, the girl in that photo still had light in them. I stared at it for a long moment and then I closed it. I left New York at 9:45 that night. As the wheels left the tarmac and the city lights fell away below me, I pressed one hand flat against my stomach and made 2 promises, one to the children inside me, and one to myself. The first was that I would get them safely into the world. The second was that one day, I would come back. Singapore greeted me with monsoon humidity and Helen's quiet, undemanding kindness. She was a woman in her 50s who moved slowly and spoke carefully and cooked the most extraordinary restorative broths I had ever tasted, and she set me up in a clean 2-room apartment above her clinic without asking a single question beyond whether I was eating enough. The first 2 months, I barely left that apartment. I sorted herbs in the clinic. I read Helen's books on postpartum recovery. I felt my body growing heavier and slower, and I talked to the twins in the dark, told them about the city we had left, about the woman I intended to become by the time they were old enough to understand what becoming meant. The 7th month came fast. I was sitting up in bed reading at 2 in the morning when the pain arrived without warning, not a cramp but a tearing, a sudden violent wrongness that dropped the book from my hands. I called Helen and she was upstairs in under 5 minutes, took one look at me, and called an ambulance. On the way to the hospital, the contractions hit like waves in a storm, and I gripped her hand so hard I was certain I would break it. She kept saying deep breaths, her voice steady while her eyes were not. The lights in the delivery room were blinding. The voices around me sounded as though they were coming from the far end of a tunnel. "Push," they said. "One more." And then the air split open with a cry, and then 30 seconds later, another one. A boy, then a girl. Premature, small, red-faced, furious at being brought into the world too soon. A nurse held them both up and I looked at those tiny wrecked faces and something inside me locked permanently into place. "Lucas," I said. "And Sophia." I had chosen those names in the Blackwood penthouse, lying awake under a crystal chandelier, imagining a future that was nothing like the one that had found me. Now I gave the names to real people, and they fit perfectly. But the joy of that moment, and it was real joy, enormous and physical and almost unbearable, was immediately followed by the hardest 3 years of my life. What no one tells you about starting over with nothing in a country that is not yours, while nursing premature twins and healing from a hemorrhage that had briefly made the doctors choose between saving me or saving them, what no one tells you is how relentlessly ordinary the difficulty is. It isn't dramatic. It's just relentless. Lucas developed a fever at 3 months that spiked to 104 in the middle of a monsoon night, and I ran through the rain holding him against my chest, unable to hail a cab, certain with every step that I was about to lose him. The doctor said it might be meningitis. I spent the entire night on my knees outside the ICU doors, not praying exactly, just refusing. Just insisting, with everything in me, that he stay. He stayed. And 6 months after that, when I opened the first location of Aura Postnatal Wellness in the empty storefront beside Helen's clinic, a local competitor launched a campaign to destroy me before I even had my first paying client. They spread rumors. They called my certifications fraudulent. They contacted 3 of the expat mothers I had begun working with and told them I was unlicensed. I lost all 3 clients in a single week. I sat in the empty treatment room at 10 o'clock at night with Lucas asleep in a carrier on my chest and Sophia in a fold-up crib in the corner, and I looked at the herbs drying on the wall and the clean treatment table and the business cards I had printed myself, and I made a decision. I was not going to let anyone grind me down quietly again. Never again. I got back up. I contacted the expat mothers directly and offered free sessions with full documentation of my credentials. 2 of them came back. They told their friends. Their friends told theirs. Within 8 months I had a waiting list. Within a year I had 3 full-time employees. By the time Lucas and Sophia took their first steps, Aura had opened a second location. I studied every night. I built a website. I hired 1 person who believed in the business before there was much business to believe in. I developed service packages and earned my international certification in postpartum recovery, and when the first major Asian parenting magazine ran a feature on Aura, I read it 3 times sitting on the kitchen floor because I needed to make sure it was real. I kept a leather journal through all of it. Milestones, setbacks, the exact way Lucas looked the first morning he said "Mama" clearly enough that I burst into tears. I never sent anything to Jade, not a photo, not a message, nothing that could be traced. The Blackwood family's reach was long and I understood it precisely. But Jade came to me twice a year, quietly, bringing news. Ryan had never legally married Serena Vale. After the ceremony, he had refused to sign the final papers. Nobody knew why. Serena held the title of fiancée and fumed about it constantly, but Margaret had neutralized her tantrums with the particular efficiency of a woman who had spent 30 years neutralizing everything inconvenient. Ryan had pulled security footage from every camera in Manhattan on the day I disappeared. He had checked airports, train stations, every intersection. He had found nothing because the passport he was looking for had never moved. He was still looking. In the 4th year, Jade told me that Blackwood Enterprises had pivoted aggressively into the maternal and infant product sector. They had bought domestic brands. They had launched a luxury maternity center line called Nurture that competed directly with what Aura did. And one evening, while the twins were building a block tower in the corner of my Singapore apartment, I opened an encrypted file on my laptop and showed Jade what I had spent 18 months collecting. Internal documents. Lab reports, 3 batches of Blackwood baby skincare products with lead toxicity levels 30 times the legal limit. Falsified safety inspection dates. Forged compliance approvals that had gotten those products onto store shelves. A financial trail showing that Margaret Blackwood had been siphoning money out of Blackwood corporate accounts for years, routing it through shell consulting firms, some of it funding Serena Vale's career, some of it disappearing into an offshore infrastructure so dense it took 4 different forensic accountants to map it. I had spent 5 years and most of my savings collecting this. Jade looked at me across the table. "What are you planning?" she asked. I looked at the Blackwood Enterprises logo on my screen. I'm going back, I said. And if you think you already know how this ends, you don't. Because what happened when I walked back into that city with 5 years of silence and everything I had built and everything I had gathered, it was nothing like I expected. Not even close. Keep watching. I promise you it's worth it. By spring of the 5th year, Aura's U.S. expansion was official. I registered the corporation, assembled an executive team, and leased 2 floors in a prime midtown Manhattan building. I filed everything under the name Lily Anderson, not Lily Blackwood, not any version of the woman I had been before. Just Lily Anderson, founder and CEO, international brand, arriving from Asia. The flight back to New York landed at 3 in the afternoon. Lucas pressed his face against the airplane window as we taxied in. "Is this where you were born?" he asked. "Yes," I told him. "And this is where you and your sister were supposed to be born too." Sophia looked up from the Rubik's Cube she had been working on for most of the flight. "Is Daddy here?" she asked. The cabin held very still for a moment. "Daddy is far away," I said. "We're going to see Aunt Jade first." Sophia nodded and went back to the cube. 4 years old, and she accepted the answer completely. She had no reference point for a father. I had never lied to her, I had simply never brought it forward. He existed the way a fact exists before it becomes relevant. Jade was waiting outside arrivals. She ran at me and grabbed me and didn't let go for a long time, and I held on back, and when she finally pulled away her eyes were red and her voice was shaking. 5 years, she said. You have any idea what these 5 years have been like for me? That evening, in the car to the Tribeca penthouse I had purchased months in advance, she briefed me on the terrain. There was a high-level networking gala the following night, Chamber of Commerce, major players, Wall Street and industry both. Ryan had RSVP'd. And Nathan Harlow would be there too. Nathan, who had spent 2 years chasing me at college before I turned him down gently, and he had gone abroad for his MBA and returned as the polished heir of a major healthcare group. Nathan, who had apparently been asking about Aura through back channels for weeks. Small world, I said. Jade's stylist spent 2 hours on me the following evening. When I stood in front of the mirror at 5 o'clock in an emerald green velvet gown, my hair slicked into a low knot, my makeup precise and underplayed except for my eyes, I stood there for a long moment just looking. The girl who used to disappear into the corners of the Blackwood penthouse wearing modest dresses and hoping not to draw attention was simply gone. The woman in the mirror did not hope for anything. She had decided. The gala was in a rotating ballroom at the top of a midtown skyscraper. Nathan found me within 20 minutes, and his face when he saw me was worth the flight alone. He recovered quickly, he had always been graceful, and we fell into easy conversation about Aura's tech integration and Harrington Health's growing maternal investment portfolio, the kind of conversation that moves fast because both people in it are genuinely interested. I felt Ryan enter the room before I saw him. That particular gravitational pull, the way a room reorganizes itself slightly when he walks in, it was exactly as I remembered. I kept talking to Nathan. I kept my eyes on Nathan's face. And then the footsteps came, steady and deliberate across the marble floor, and the conversations around us fell quiet one by one, and Ryan Blackwood was standing 3 feet away. 5 years. He was harder. The lines around his eyes had deepened and something in his bearing had calcified, like a man who had spent half a decade making decisions that cost him and had stopped expecting anything different. He stared at me. His gaze moved over my face, my posture, the glass in my hand, and back to my eyes, and what passed through his expression in those seconds, shock, confusion, disbelief, and then something that locked down into a dark and absolute intensity. I watched all of it without any expression at all. "Ryan," I said pleasantly. "Long time no see." He asked where I had been. "Singapore," I said. "I started a business. Things are going well." "And you?" I hear Blackwood Enterprises is thriving. He said we needed to talk. I introduced him to Nathan and told him now wasn't a good time, that this was a professional event and I was here representing Aura, that he was welcome to have his assistant reach out to my office. He stepped closer. Close enough that I could smell the cedar cologne he had never changed. Close enough that I had to hold myself very still. You are my legal wife, he said. You vanish for 5 years and you're telling me we have nothing personal to discuss. The room around us had gone completely silent. I set my glass down carefully on a nearby table and I looked at him. Legal wife, I repeated, my voice low and perfectly clear. You seem to have forgotten that I signed the divorce papers 5 years ago. Your refusal to countersign does not change the fact that we have been separated for 5 years. The marriage is over. My legal team will be delivering formal divorce filings to your corporate offices Monday morning. I turned away from him before he could respond, linked my arm through Jade's, and walked toward the other end of the room. Later, as the gala wound down and Jade went to get the car, Ryan appeared beside me at the entrance. He asked about the baby. His voice was gravel and scotch and something that might have been guilt if he had ever been capable of wearing guilt in a way that wasn't also about himself. Did I give birth? He asked. I told him I did. He started to reach for my arm and I stepped back. They have nothing to do with you, I said. They are mine. Entirely mine. And I told him that he had surrendered every right he had ever had the day he said I do to another woman while I was carrying his children alone. I left him standing on the sidewalk looking like something had been removed from him without anesthetic. The next morning began the most important week of my life. Lucas and Sophia's first day at their new Manhattan preschool went smoothly until 9:45, when the school called me. My son had been in an altercation. Another child had shoved my daughter and taken her toy, Lucas had pushed back, and the other boy's mother was in the principal's office demanding answers with the particular energy of a woman who had never once in her life been told no. I walked in to find Lucas standing beside his teacher with his back perfectly straight and his expression composed and slightly furious, and across the room, a crying boy clinging to a woman in oversized Chanel sunglasses who was already mid-sentence about feral children and absent parents. Serena Vale. Even without seeing her eyes I recognized the posture. The performance of outrage, calibrated perfectly to maximize discomfort in whoever was watching. Her son Tyler had a faint scratch on his cheek. Lucas was immaculate. Serena heard the door and turned, and when she saw me her sentence stopped mid-word. I ignored her entirely and walked to my son. I crouched to his level and asked what happened. He told me calmly, Tyler had grabbed Sophia's doll and pushed her. Lucas had asked him to apologize. Tyler said no and called Sophia a name. So Lucas had pushed him. Pushed him. Serena's voice climbed. My son's cheek is marked and you call that a push? She turned to the teacher. How does a school like this allow children with violent tendencies through the door? The teacher attempted to de-escalate. Serena accelerated. And then she said the words that changed the temperature of the entire room. Her voice dropped into the particular register that people use when they want to wound without being technically accountable. She looked at Lucas and said, fatherless children always have these behavioral issues. I stood up slowly. There was a version of me that would have gone cold and silent and absorbed it. That version no longer existed. I looked directly at Serena Vale and I said, quietly and without any warmth at all, apologize to my son. Right now. She laughed. She actually laughed. And then she looked me up and down and said something about new money and asked what kind of mother raises a boy who hits. I asked the teacher to pull the security footage. Serena said I had no authority here. I said I had every authority here, and I said it in the voice I had been cultivating for 5 years in rooms where people tried to tell me otherwise. That was when the door opened a second time. Ryan walked in, suit jacket over his arm, sleeves already rolled. He had clearly rushed directly from his office. He stopped in the doorway and took in the room, the crying boy, the teacher, Serena mid-outrage, and then his eyes found Lucas. And stopped. The resemblance was not subtle. The shape of the brows, the bridge of the nose, the way Lucas held his shoulders when he was angry, I had seen those features every morning across a breakfast table for 3 years. Ryan stared at my son the way you stare at something that shouldn't exist, something that rearranges every assumption you've ever had about the structure of reality. Serena was still talking. Ryan was not hearing a word of it. "Whose child is this?" he said. His voice was almost no volume at all. I stepped in front of Lucas. "Hello again, Ryan," I said. He looked at me. And the storm that moved through his face in that moment, the shock giving way to calculation giving way to anguish, I watched it all without moving. He asked how old Lucas was. I told him 4. Born December 17th. He did the arithmetic instantly and the color left his face in a single sheet. He turned and looked at Sophia, who was watching from behind the teacher's leg with enormous, skeptical eyes that were entirely mine, and he had to grip the edge of the principal's desk to keep from going down. Serena, finally realizing something had shifted irrevocably in the room, grabbed his arm. "Alex. What is this? Do you know them?" He didn't answer her. He looked at me for a long moment. His Adam's apple moved. "You had them this whole time," he said. His voice was barely a breath. "What did you expect me to do?" I said. "Wait for your mother to find a way to make them disappear?" He asked how we were going to resolve the situation with the children. I told him Tyler was going to apologize to both of my children for his behavior. Ryan crouched down, looked Tyler in the eye, and with a directness that surprised even me, he told the boy to apologize. Tyler cried harder. Serena was incensed. Ryan told Tyler again. Tyler finally, miserably, said he was sorry. Sophia said it was okay. Lucas said nothing, just looked at me. I took both children by the hand and walked out. In the parking garage, once I had buckled them both in, I sat in the driver's seat and realized my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't get the key into the ignition. From the back seat, Lucas's voice came very quietly. "Mom. Is that man my dad?" I turned around. 2 sets of eyes looking at me. One calm and direct. One wide and soft. I told them the truth in the only language that made sense for 4-year-olds. That man and I had something happen between us a long time ago that was very painful, and we would not all be living together, but that they had my whole heart and that was enough for 3 people. Lucas nodded. Then he said, "I don't like him." I asked why. "Because when you looked at him," he said, "your eyes went sad." I saw it. I held the steering wheel and did not allow myself to cry until I was certain they couldn't see my face. If you're watching this and you've ever been in a situation where someone underestimated what you were capable of, leave me a comment right now with the words, "I came back." Because that is exactly what this story is. And if you haven't already, subscribe. There is so much more coming, and you need to be here for it. 2 days later, Ryan arrived at the preschool with a corporate attorney and demanded cheek swabs for a paternity test. I agreed on the spot. He hadn't expected that, and I named my conditions. The swabs were taken in my presence, at a lab of my choosing, and when the results confirmed what we both already knew, he and Margaret would stay out of my personal life entirely. He said that was impossible. I told him I'd see him in court and reached for my bag. He blocked the door. He said he had rights. I looked at him and said 4 things. I said, 5 years ago, when I was 5 months pregnant and went alone to a clinic for my ultrasound, you were throwing a multi-million-dollar wedding with another woman. I said, your mother told me to get an abortion and you said nothing. I said, you sent me to voicemail every time I needed you, and I built 2 human beings without a single word from you. And I said, don't stand in this room talking to me about rights, Ryan. You destroyed those with your own hands. He had no answer. I walked out. Margaret came to Jade's office the following afternoon. She arrived with a Hermes bag and a check for $5 million and the same expression she had worn the day she sat in the Blackwood penthouse and told me I was not elite enough for her family's legacy. She slid the check across the mahogany table like she was doing me a favor. "Take it," she said. "Take the children and leave this country permanently." I picked up the check. I held it for a moment. I thought about the night I ran through a monsoon in Singapore holding a burning baby. I thought about the morning I lost 3 clients in 1 week and sat alone in an empty treatment room and got back up anyway. I thought about the press conference I had already scheduled. Then I tore the check into pieces and let them fall like snow across her perfectly polished table. "Your debt cannot be paid in zeros," I told her. And I listed, slowly, everything she had done. The coercion. The bribery of my OB. The orchestration of a fabricated affair rumor to use against me. The offshore accounts. The falsified FDA reports. I had proof of all of it and I told her so. Margaret's composure cracked for the first time in all the years I had known her. Her pupils dilated. Her lips went pale. "The bill is coming due," I told her. I suggested Jade show her out. Margaret left. Jade grabbed my hands across the table and told me I was insane. I told her to find me the most aggressive divorce attorney in New York. And then I told her to contact Serena Vale's former personal assistant, the one who had been quietly willing to talk for years, waiting for someone to ask. It was time to drag this into the light. The press conference was on a Friday at 2 p.m. in the grand ballroom of one of Manhattan's oldest hotels. Jade had worked for 3 weeks on the guest list. Media. Wall Street investors. Industry partners. And in the third row on the right side, Ryan Blackwood, alone except for his attorney, sitting with his posture rigid and his jaw set, watching the stage. I walked out in a razor-white Alexander McQueen suit, hair pulled back hard, and I stood in the light and looked at the room. I spoke for 5 minutes about Aura's U.S. launch. I announced the partnership with Nathan Harlow's healthcare group. The applause was enormous. And then I lowered the remote in my hand and said, "Today, beyond introducing our brand, I want to use this platform to make a personal statement." The room went silent. I told them what had happened 5 years ago. I said it plainly, the way you say a thing when you've held it long enough that the weight no longer frightens you. I told them about the waiting room and the television screen and the referral slip damp in my hands. I clicked the remote and behind me, on the massive screen, the security footage appeared, time-stamped from 5 years back, the VIP waiting room of a Manhattan maternity clinic, a younger and paler version of me clutching my stomach while a wedding played on the wall-mounted television behind me. It lasted 30 seconds. It said everything. The room erupted. Ryan stood up. His attorney grabbed his arm. Cameras swung off the stage and locked onto his face. I clicked the remote again. Lab reports. Internal memos. Purchase orders. 3 batches of Blackwood baby skincare products, lead toxicity levels 30 times the legal threshold, falsified compliance dates, forged signatures on safety approvals. And then, on a final click, a bank check. $5 million. Margaret Blackwood's signature. Dated 5 days prior. I have already forwarded all documentation to the FDA, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and the Department of Justice, I said. Ryan's lawyer was on his feet screaming slander. Ryan was no longer moving. He stood in the third row looking at the screen and then at me, and the thing that passed through his expression was not anger. It was the specific devastation of a man realizing that the machine he had trusted completely had been running on corruption the entire time, and he had been too obedient to look. "I am not standing here to play the victim," I said into the microphone. "I am standing here because a woman who is betrayed does not have to stay silent. Because a mother protecting her children can build herself into something unstoppable. And because those who commit sins against people who trusted them will eventually have to settle the account. I bowed once and left the stage. In the alley behind the hotel, Ryan caught up to me. His jacket was gone. His tie was in his pocket. He had been crying, actually crying, something I had never once seen from this man in 3 years of marriage, and he looked at me with the wreckage of someone who has just understood, all at once, every terrible thing he participated in and called it duty. He said it wasn't the right way to find out about the fake safety reports. He said he hadn't known. He said he hadn't known what his mother had done to me either, the coercion, the pressure to abort, the manufactured affair photos. He said the wedding had not been his choice, that Margaret had threatened to destroy herself if he didn't go through with the merger marriage, and he had been young enough and controlled enough to believe her leverage was real. I listened to all of it. When he finished, I told him that none of it changed what had happened to me. That knowing it was complicated on his side did not give me back the 5 years or the hemorrhage on a delivery table or the monsoon night with a burning baby or the early mornings building something from nothing in a country that was not mine. That a man who could be maneuvered by his mother into publicly humiliating his pregnant wife was not someone who had been a husband in any real sense of the word. He said he knew that. He said, "Let me see them. Please. I'm their father." I told him when the dust settled, if they wanted to see him, I would arrange it. I got in the car. I did not look back. The paternity results came back on a Wednesday morning, both attorneys present, sealed envelope opened in a clinical lab with fluorescent lights and linoleum floors. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Biological father confirmed. The paper slipped from Ryan's hands when he read it and fluttered to the floor. I picked it up, folded it, and handed it to his lawyer. "Now you know," I said. "That is the only thing you will ever be entitled to know." The formal divorce hearing was Monday morning in Manhattan Family Court. Jade and Nathan sat in the gallery. Margaret was not present. She had been transferred to a private care facility in Switzerland after suffering a cardiac episode the morning after the press conference. Ryan sat at the respondents' table in a black suit, his face gaunt, his posture correct. My attorney laid out the case. 5 years of documented abandonment. Documented attempts to coerce termination of pregnancy. One-sided signed separation agreement. Full legal and physical custody requested. Ryan's attorney contested the visitation waiver. I asked the judge for permission to address the court directly. He granted it. I looked at Ryan and asked him one question. On the day I was 5 months pregnant and went alone to my ultrasound appointment, where was he? The courtroom went completely still. Ryan's lips parted. His voice came out dry as stone. Preparing for my wedding. And at that time, I said, were we still legally married? Yes, he said. I kept my eyes on his face. Then does a man who stages a multi-million-dollar public wedding with another woman while his wife is carrying his children have any right to stand in a courtroom and claim the privileges of a father? The silence that followed was the longest of my life. Ryan stared at the desk in front of him for what felt like a full minute. His attorney leaned in and said something quietly. Ryan shook his head once. Then he looked up. He said, "I do not have that right, Your Honor." His attorney went pale. Ryan kept talking. He said he withdrew all contestations. He consented to the divorce. He consented to full legal and physical custody being awarded to me. He waived visitation. He said, "I owe her a debt I cannot repay. This is the only thing I have left to give her." The judge granted the divorce. Full custody to me. Maximum child support ordered. Visitation voluntarily surrendered and honored by the court. When I walked out of the courthouse into the New York sun, Jade tackled me on the marble steps. Nathan shook my hand with something in his expression that was equal parts respect and relief. And then the brass doors opened behind us and Ryan came out. He reached inside his jacket and held out a thick manila envelope. I didn't take it immediately. He told me what was inside: the signed divorce decree, and a legal transfer of 5% of Blackwood Enterprises voting stock from his personal holdings, for me and the children. He asked me not to reject it. He said I and the children had earned it. And then he started down the steps. "Ryan," I called. He stopped. Didn't turn. "If they want to see you," I said, "you can. Supervised by me. Only if they agree." I watched his shoulders move beneath his suit. He stood there for a long time. Then he nodded once and kept walking. 3 months later, he called me from the roof of the Blackwood building. He said he had something to give me in person. He said he was alone. After a long pause, I agreed to come. The rooftop was cold and bright. He was standing by the edge looking out over the city when I came through the door, and he didn't turn immediately. He held out another legal folio when he finally faced me. 8% of Blackwood voting shares, he said. Combined with the 5% from the courthouse, it made me the third largest shareholder in the company. He told me he was leaving. That he had divested entirely. That there was nothing left for him in New York. I asked when his flight was. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Europe." Did the children know? He shook his head. He said he would FaceTime them once he was settled. The wind came hard between the buildings and moved his coat, and neither of us spoke for a moment. He asked, quietly, whether we might have had a real chance, if his mother had never done what she did, if the wedding had never happened, if things had been different. I thought about that for a genuine moment. I thought about the girl I had been, and the woman standing on a rooftop in the autumn wind, and the gap between them that could not be crossed in either direction. "There are no ifs in life," I said. "It's time for both of us to move on." He smiled. It was a sad smile but a real one, the first real thing I had seen from him in years. He held out his hand. "Let's shake hands one last time," he said. "I wish you and the children nothing but happiness." I shook his hand. "Take care of yourself," I told him. I walked toward the door. He called my name one more time over the wind. I stopped and looked back. He was standing at the edge with the entire city behind him and the autumn sky above him, and in that light, against all of that enormity, he looked like exactly what he was, a man who had finally run out of ways to avoid the consequences of the life he had chosen. "I'm sorry," he shouted. "And thank you for loving me once." I walked through the door and let it close behind me. In the elevator, staring at my reflection in the mirrored walls, the tears came. I let them. They were not for him, not for the man on the roof or the man who had walked down that aisle or any version of him. They were for the girl who had loved him. For the 3 years she had spent trying to be enough for a family that had already decided she wasn't. For every appointment she went to alone, every promise she accepted, every morning she woke up in that penthouse and hoped today would be different. I cried for her, and then I let her go. The void in my chest, the cold, specific emptiness that had lived there for 5 years, was gone when the elevator reached the ground floor. Not because anything had been restored. Not because the damage had been undone. But because I had walked all the way to the end of it, and there was nothing left on the other side but the life I had already built. I unlocked the door to the penthouse. The afternoon light was coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows in long warm sheets. Lucas and Sophia were on the rug with their toys, and when Sophia heard the door she dropped everything and ran at me full speed and grabbed my legs and looked up. "Mommy," she said. "Why are your eyes red?" I knelt down and pulled them both in, and held them, and breathed them in. "Because I'm happy," I told them. "Why are you happy?" "Because I have you." Lucas leaned against my arm with the particular seriousness he carried everywhere, the weight of a child who understands more than he should, and he patted my shoulder very gently. "We are the happiest too," he said. Outside the window, the sun was going down behind the Hudson. The clouds were gold and orange and the city below was doing what it always did, moving, urgent and indifferent and beautiful. The past was behind me. Not erased. Not forgiven, not entirely. But finished. Carried and set down. Over. A new life had already begun. If you made it to the end of this story, then you already know, this was never really about revenge. It was about a woman who refused to be defined by the moment that broke her. If this story meant something to you, subscribe right now so you don't miss what comes next. And I want to hear from you in the comments, what was the moment in this story that hit you the hardest? Tell me below. I read every single one. And until next time, remember, the people who counted you out are going to have a very interesting few years ahead of them.